It started as a small brush fire a little after 2 p.m. in Griffith Park, California. The blaze quickly spread through the park trails where thousands of men were out clearing the brush and maintaining the roads. The men didn't have access to water, so they tried to fight the fire with their shovels, and within 15 minutes, the smoke was halfway up the canyon. The fire took the lives of 29 people. That was October 3rd, 1933. It was the deadliest fire in California until Paradise. In this past hour, we learned that the death toll in and around the California town of Paradise is now 42, making the Camp Fire the deadliest in California state history. Right now, there are 3 huge fires raging across California: the Camp Fire, the Woolsey Fire, and the Hill Fire. Statewide, 44 people have died. Hundreds of thousands have been forced to evacuate. 8,000 firefighters have been dispatched across the state, risking their lives, battling these wind-driven wildfires, which is what makes what happened this weekend particularly troubling. The president took to Twitter, claiming that California's forest mismanagement is to blame for the fires and threatening to withhold federal funds from the state. In response, the president of California Professional Firefighters issued a scathing statement calling the president's tweet, quote, ill-informed, ill-timed, and demeaning. He also pointed out that the president did not have his facts straight. Quote, nearly 60% of California's forests are under federal management, another 1/3 under private control. It's the federal government that has chosen to divert resources away from forest management, not California. He went on, quote, natural disasters are not red or blue. They destroy regardless of party. Right now, families are in mourning. Thousands have lost homes. 250,000 Americans have been forced to flee. At this desperate time, we would encourage the president to offer support in word and deed instead of recrimination and blame. Joining me now, the guy who authored that statement, Brian Rice, president of the California Professional Firefighters. Mr. Rice, we appreciate your time tonight, and we thank you and your members and all first responders and firefighters and medical professionals for doing what they are doing to keep Americans safe right now. What's the latest?
Thank you. You know, the news on the fire front up in Paradise and then in Woolsey too, it's looking better. I'll go back up to Paradise as far as the weather is beginning to cooperate now. You know, they have personnel and equipment on scene. Down at the Woolsey fire, a lot of the area is down, but the winds are still up. And that, on either of these, when the winds come up, that could change everything in a heartbeat.
I know earlier, a couple of hours ago, the Camp Fire seemed to have been about 25% contained, the Woolsey Fire about 20%. What do these numbers mean in real life? What is supposed to make people feel safe? What degree of containment?
I think in California, when you start to see the containment begin to approach 50%, and there's a good weather outlook, you can begin to have a little bit of a sigh of relief.
Talk to me in simple terms about what the president said and what it really means. There are a lot of people who've pushed back saying, regardless of whether it was ill-timed and ill-conceived, it's just not actually correct what the president has said about California and why there are these massive wildfires there.
You know, I'll absolutely stand by what my statement said. And the forest system in the United States, and certainly California is part of that, is very complex. And it's complex between state and federal government. In the case of the Camp Fire started in federal FRA, federal responsibility area. The federal government had responsibility for that land. They gave the fire suppression piece over the state and CAL FIRE, but the overall management of that they retained, which includes vegetation management. The statement or the initial tweet to say that there is no reason for these fires to have taken place, there's several reasons, and the top 3 are absolutely weather-driven that we can't have an effect on. There's no doubt that forest management can be better across this nation in our national forest lands, but to say there's no reason, that it doesn't make any sense. We have red flag conditions; they're still here, and everybody needs. If you're a citizen, you need to be on your guard. We're in the 7th year of a drought. Live and dead fuel moistures are at an all-time low. We still have low humidities, and we still have a wind. And those things in and of themselves, that you cannot control the best maintained forest when you have 50, 60, and 70 mile an hour winds pushing a fire, you're in trouble.
Like hurricane type winds. The president, maybe in response to what you said or otherwise, did tweet out a more traditional response. He also tweeted out that he had signed an expedited request for a major disaster declaration for California. What do firefighters need to fight these fires? Does this help you when the president says this?
Yes, and I do think the president completed his mission, and that certainly we owe it a nod and an appreciation of thanks. And that's good. But when you lead men and women on the fire lines or any situation with that, their morale is incredibly important. And the initial tweet did nothing to help the morale. I think, and I hope that there's a boost, that the firefighters on the line know not only their local and state officials have their back, but also their federal government has their back.
Well, I don't make it a habit to speak on behalf of our viewers, but I think it's fair to say tonight the country has your back. The country's behind you. The country's very grateful for the work that you do. Firefighters run toward a fire while the rest of us run away from it. Brian, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Brian Rice is the president of the California Professional Firefighters. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.